A good writer must also be a good reader. So, fellow writers, fans, creatives, all of you out there listening, what are you reading these days and how will it influence your writing? What lessons can you apply to it from your own writing? That's a question I always ask you to start these off. So today I'm giving you my book review of my latest fiction read and telling you what I can learn from it. And it's a big one, as in a big book and a classic, so stick with me here. Um, this is Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. It's a thick book, as you can see, one of those hardcover classics that I've been reading a lot of contemporary, sci-fi and stuff. I like to switch it up every once in a while. Maybe not as often as I should, but try to stick with classics once in a while and enrich myself and expand my horizons with those. This version especially is interesting to me. It's the Guide to Reading and Reflecting by Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor. If you're not familiar with Dr. Pryor, she's a former professor of mine, actually, who I had the privilege to study under earlier. But she's now getting kind of big in academic and literary circles, so that's pretty cool. She's published a series of these classics with her own commentary and guide to reading and reflecting, and she's published articles and such for big name publications. She has a strong social media presence. I've actually had her on this podcast video series before, and I've reviewed one of her books probably a year ago now. Honestly, it was my first ever foray into Jane Austen, but she's putting out these classics with her commentary and other books on literature and things like that. So that's pretty cool. I always start off by saying she's a former professor of mine because I'm honored to be able to say I've studied under her. But yeah, so Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Thomas Hardy. This is from the late Victorian period, like 1892, I think I heard. It's been on my to read list for a while, but, partially through Dr. Pryor's recommendation. I mean, I think I had heard it recommended by other people before too. I've read some of Thomas Hardy's poetry before this, but never one of his novels. So I wanted to get to this one for a while. I guess it's one of his most well known. And once this hardcover copy came out with extra commentary from Dr. Pryor earlier this year, I was quick to grab it up and read it. So let me tell you in about, I'll try to keep this short-ish, but in about 15 minutes-ish, what I liked, what I didn't like. Actually, I don't have a lot to say in that area, honestly. And what we as writers can pull from it and apply from it. Okay, so like I said, the story is over 100 years old. It was written in 1892 or published around then, something like that, in England. So Victorian society, that kind of thing. If you're not familiar with the plot, it's about the girl Tess is the main character, and she is essentially raped. Let me come back to that in just a minute. But she is basically loses her purity due to a man, and of course, in that culture, it's that's very disgraceful, and the rest of it is about her kind of society's reaction to her and her trying to live a semi-normal life after that. Okay, now I said raped. Maybe that wasn't the right word. There is some intentional ambiguity over whether over exactly what happens, and Dr. Pryor talks about that in her commentary too. The ambiguity is intentional. We don't see whether the guy who does it, whether he just kind of seduced her or actually took her by force, like whether he badgered her and badgered her and badgered her until she gave in, or if he literally just took her by force. Either way, it's definitely his fault. I mean, even if she kind of conceded to him, he was pressuring her for a long time and all that stuff. And in those days, women didn't have many rights and hadn't really, in many cases, I'm sure, hadn't been taught how to stand up to a man and things like that. So Tess is like this 19, 20-year-old girl and has this man who's interested in her, and she is almost helpless at his whim. I mean, I mean, I guess it's things she could have done, but again, in that society, she's not used to it. She's never had to before. She doesn't know what to do. Anyway, one character in the novel later says she was more sinned against than sinning, and I think the author takes that view too, and I took that view too, even before I read that line. So I mean, there is some intentional ambiguity about what happens, whether it was for physical force or just kind of verbal, emotional coercion. But anyway, she is taken by this man early on in the book, like in the first section, and then the rest of the story is about how she kind of responds to that and how others respond to her, like how we see how her family responds, and it's in this Victorian society of upright morals and everything like that, it's not necessarily the way you might think or hope they would respond, not quite as compassionate as we'd hope. And the guy experiences almost no consequences, and then all the consequences are on Tess because everyone knows her now as this impure woman, even though she was mostly not the perpetrator there. She was the wronged victim, and I mean, people say that that kind of thing happens today too. That kind of culture happens today. If so, it definitely was true in Victorian society over 100 years ago. That um, that a woman who was wronged in that way was treated like that. She goes on from there over the course of the novel, tries to escape her life, moves to a different town. I mean, not super far away, but a little bit away, and just takes a job and ends up falling in love with another guy. And he wants to marry her, but she has this terrible secret, which again shouldn't be a huge deal. I mean, to some, hopefully we would think so. To someone who's forgiving and such, but in that society, it's not very accepted. So she's like, "What do I do? Do I tell him? Do I not tell him about the secret? How do I handle that?" Um, I won't tell you too much more specifics of the plot because that would get into spoiler territory. But really interesting book. I mean, I knew the premise beforehand, but I didn't know that it was about a girl who was assaulted or whatever you want to call it. I didn't know all the details, and so it is an interesting story. Hardy generally has a bleak view of life. I mean, not so bleak. I wouldn't call it total nihilism, but he's he's critiquing his society. He's critiquing, in many ways, the church and the kind of the established worldview of the day, as well as the this uptight, this formal, fancy British society that in some ways espouse pure morals and believes in sexual purity and things like that, which is all well and good. But when someone is wronged in this way, they are either not consistent or just not compassionate in how they treat that. And he was critiquing this. I mean, he critiques a lot of things. Religion is a big theme here. Hardy was brought up in Christian teaching, and then he later had a crisis of faith. I think the introduction says he never fully recovered from his crisis of faith, so he's in many ways critiquing the church and critiquing um, people's actions and viewpoints. I wouldn't say attacking or lambasting necessarily, but giving honest and sometimes necessary critique because even in the church, even in today's Christian culture, much less of 100 years ago, there's issues we haven't figured out and haven't gotten right yet, and that issues where our people's response to things are often not what they should be. So I think some of this critique is helpful and necessary. I mean, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're part of the church or not, whatever side of that debate you fall on. I mean, you might agree with his critiques, or you might need to hear them yourself. So I think it's helpful and useful to a lot of us to wrestle with these issues and see kind of how they're dealt with here. What did I like about this book? A lot of things. Of course, it is an overstyled writing. It was the prose was it's lofty, it's high. Like I mean, he uses a lot of like flowery language to describe settings, and he kind of he uses a lot of literary references and scriptural references and references to philosophers and things like that. He's very learned. I mean more so than me even. I don't know who a lot of these people are from 100 years ago or more. But the footnotes really help. Dr. Pryor gives footnotes throughout to explain either old-fashioned phrases or references that the reader may not be familiar with. So that is helpful. So yes, I mean it's for light reading. It's not necessarily what you jump to as like an escapist novel. The prose is heavier than you're probably used to today, than I'm used to today. But I still found it engaging enough. Like it wasn't to the point where it was hard to understand. I mean, some parts I might have zoned out a little bit. I mean, in certain paragraphs, but overall, I can follow the plot. Didn't have any trouble with that. He does give sometimes long descriptions, like just long descriptions of settings, and for me personally, that's not always my cup of tea. I mean, I'm not saying I hate it. I'm just saying that's the part that doesn't engage me as much. But when he gets back to the plot pretty quickly, and there are large sections of plot and dialogue and such, and those are easier for me to follow. So yeah, the plot moves along, and I was just always interested. I always myself wanted to know what happens next, and kind of hoping for some positive resolution for Tess, even though I knew he had a bleak outlook, and it's largely a tragedy, and I kind of knew it wasn't going to end well. Spoilers, it doesn't. That's the only spoiler I'll give, is that it does have, it is largely a tragedy, and I almost joked about, I want to call this book a series of unfortunate events, because that's what it feels like to me, and it does largely end poorly. I'm not saying that the end is bad. I'm just saying it's a negative ending for the characters. I guess that's all I'll tell you for now. But yeah, so the plot was engaging to me, just seeing how Tess advanced in these ways, and hoping she'd have some redemption and things like that. The characters, I think, were well written. There's three major characters, I'd say. Tess, of course, and Alec is the man who assaults her, and Angel is the man she later falls in love with, the young man, and I think those three are the main characters, and they're well written. They're all fleshed out well. I'll come back to that in a little bit, actually, probably when I talk about applications. But yeah, I think that they're all multifaceted characters, well fleshed out. So that's helpful. And then just the social commentary, I think, is relevant. I mean, it's needed. Again, if it was needed 100 years ago, maybe we've made some steps in progress, but probably not as many as we'd like to think. I think it is useful to address these issues. Again, in our society, within the church, whatever, to think about how do we treat someone who's been sinned against, or even has sinned themselves, and what's our proper response to that, and what does this look like to the outside world, to someone someone like Hardy, who is not a religious person and is critiquing the religious society of his day. Those are good questions to ask, relevant questions, and I think this novel does a great job at addressing them. I think Dr. Pryor's commentary and reflection questions help guide us along. So I really would recommend this. I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's not a light read. It took me, I've been trying to read like 2 books a month. This one took me most of the month of August. Actually, I think I started in late July, and there were days I was falling behind. It is like 650 pages. There were days I was falling behind on my schedule, and I had to like read more to catch up. And I was like, I want to finish because it's good. I just it's long, it's heavy. I mean, it's physically heavy in addition to the subject matter, and of course, at nighttime when I try to read, I fall asleep. But anyway, good book. I mean, prepare yourself for it, because it's not just like a relaxing beach read of a weekend or whatever. But it is a good book that gives you a lot of good ideas, or I guess addresses a lot of important ideas, and helps you navigate through some of those questions. Okay, applications for writers. For what lessons can we apply from this book to our own writing? I always ask that question because it's primarily a writing video series podcast. So here's a few applications. One, when it comes to sensitive topics like obviously rape or sexual assault or things like that, I think what Hardy did in his intentional ambiguity was good. I think he was sensitive in handling that. He didn't even. Part of why it's ambiguous is he doesn't like describe the event. I mean, in detail, because if he did, it would probably be less ambiguous. But he kind of basically gets you to the point of where it's about to happen, and then it's a chapter break, and then the next scene is a few weeks later. So basically, you know what happens, but you don't have to watch it, which I think is good. The Victorians, they were known for a sense of morality and purity that today we'd call prudish, but I don't think they got everything right, but I think they got a few things right, and we could take a page out of their book there to not indulge in the gruesome sexual situations. If you have to write about that, and I think there is a time and place too, because we're creative writers and we write about life, and these things happen in real life. I guess what I'm saying is you have to write about it. Do it in a way that doesn't indulge, that don't describe every detail of whatever assault happens, because that's tantamount to pornographic, and it's kind of just letting the reader experience that, which if you are trying to give some kind of moral or social commentary or some kind of critique of that behavior, it'll probably get lost in the details there, or lost in the visuals of what you're doing. So I think it's good to make it clear what happens, imply what happens, but don't like write that scene detail by detail, because that's not what the reader needs necessarily. In the first draft of my novel, or actually recent drafts until now, I had a rape scene, and I rewrote it multiple times, and I eventually just like scrapped that whole chapter and rewrote it and toned it down, because I just couldn't get it right. It's hard to handle sensitively, and I've had beta readers and such, and comment on a lot of things. It's not just that scene, but it's hard for me to get it. It's hard to handle sensitively. In the new version that I've completely rewritten, there is a milder form of assault. It's not rape, and that's not even the focus of the whole chapter. And I'm like, yes, this thing does happen, but I don't want to be like edgy for the sake of being edgy, and I don't want to be just grotesque for the sake of being grotesque, and I certainly don't want to indulge in it more than is necessary. That's hard for a writer to get right. I'm thankfully I'm not a real life expert on these things, but I'm like, I wanted to deal with it, at least in passing, in the story, for one character who is bitter and troubled about her past for various reasons, and I eventually just I was like, this needs to be not the main focus. I mean, it's in there a little bit now, but I toned it down a lot, because I was like, what I had was not necessary and not helpful, and I think some of it was just me, like, as I wrote my first draft like 10 years ago. Some of it was just me trying to be edgy when I didn't need to be edgy, and because maybe 10 years ago I thought that was what made a good novel. I don't know, but I toned it down a lot, because it's just there's a right and wrong way to handle that, and it has to be handled with sensitivity, obviously. So if you're dealing with those topics, and I think good writers need to sometimes take a page from Hardy's book. Secondly, I'd say if you're doing social commentary, take a page from his book, because he does it well in a way that gives critiques, again, without directly attacking or lambasting. Like I said, yes, he does get necessary critiques, but he doesn't come out and say, oh, the church is bad, society is bad. He gives you questions and different layers to think through. The three main characters, some of them kind of could be attributed to one philosophy or one worldview or another, but I'd say they're all multifaceted. Like they're not all good or bad. Tess is at first a passive victim, and actually for much of the novel you'd call her a passive victim, but later on she definitely grows stronger and more confident and breaks out of that victimhood in ways that surprised me. There were some twists and turns I didn't see coming. I meant to say that. The plot kept me engaged till the end. So yeah, so she's written well. Alec, like I said, is the man who commits the assault, and he's mostly a villain. I mean, he's the most obvious villain of the story, and he does later go through some different worldview changes and experiences at least some remorse. I mean, he's still not a good guy. I certainly wouldn't call him a good guy, but he's not. I mean, I hesitate to say this about a potential rapist, but he's not completely evil. He at least has some. He feels some remorse. He goes back and forth in his mind about things. Doesn't make him good. Does make him human. He's multifaceted. And even Angel, the girl who, or the man who Claire falls in love with, Angel's last name is Claire. Angel is the man who Tess falls in love with later in the book. He is critical of religion also, and I think Hardy is kind of setting him up as maybe, I mean, in some ways he shares Hardy's views on that subject, and he's not as bad as Angel, but he tries. I think he has good intentions, but he's still, in some ways, we could probably criticize his behavior toward Tess and toward other people, maybe because that's just because he's not perfect. He's a flawed character. He thinks he's escaped from tradition, but in some ways he doesn't, because he's still affected by Tessa's secret and that kind of thing. So these three characters, I mean, they're the main characters. They're each multifaceted. They're well written to the point that even if one of them does encapsulate part of Hardy's philosophy, even if one of them does represent religion or one of them represents secularism, which I'm not sure if you could completely say that. But even if they did, they're all multifaceted to the point where he's giving mixed messages. Or I wouldn't say mixed messages, but he is not giving he's not hammering you over the head with his message. He's you know the characters do not disappear into the moral if in as much as there is a moral. The characters are multifaceted and are believable and are flawed and human, and that's because they should be. And even as if they embody or at least espouse different philosophies, they fail to live up to their own philosophies sometimes, and that's just the way it is. Because yeah, so if you're doing social commentary, do it in a way that doesn't hammer the reader over the head with whatever you're saying. And I think as writers, there is a place for lots of us to do social commentary to a degree. I mean, that's not always the first point or the first purpose of your novel, but we should be saying something. I mean, entertainment is good too, but a lot of us want to say something, or at least make the world a better place, or somehow I guess give a moral or a lesson beyond just the entertainment. So if you're doing that, just make sure the story is still engaging, the characters are still interesting and multifaceted, and that your moral or whatever lesson you have is there. But don't let the characters in the story get lost in the moral, I guess is what I want to say. It's still a story with characters who must be interesting and engaging on their own. Hardy does that well. So those are two things for writers. Handle sensitive scenes well, handle social commentary well. If you're writing either of those, which I'm sure some of you are, those are lessons to take away. I encourage you to read Tess D'Urberville's, and again, Dr. Pryor's version with commentary is really helpful, so go check that out. And in the meantime, have a great weekend, keep doing what you're doing, keep writing, and I will see you later. Thanks for listening.